Elizabeth asked a very key question. Why should we make a priority of LGBT rights over anything else? I mean, why is it so important? She also says, let's evolve at our own rate. Let us evolve at our own rate. Jessica then made the point, though, also that party political advantage is part of this battle, and that actually this battle is a Trojan horse for a number of other advantages and political choices, if you like. Kevin made the point that actually you shouldn't link to conditionality, and you need to change the narrative on the way in which we talk about these things, which again is Elizabeth's point, which is you need to find a different point of entry, if you like, this question of the economic one. Sunil's point was that you clearly need to do it in forms of solidarity, that this is essentially about solidarity. And the last sort of point I want to bring out was that actually there's huge difficulty in measuring the impact of this stuff. Elizabeth, I did want to ask you one question, though, which arose from what you said to us, was that what if the countries in question don't want to evolve, or the politicians in question don't want to evolve, and their people are suffering accordingly, and there is a huge impact on them both socially and economically? Do we simply wait, the rest of the world, those of us that are gay, that feel some solidarity with those people?
But it is not possible for a country, not any society, not to evolve on any subject. That is just an impossibility. I mean,
I said if you don't want to evolve, and it appears that some of the leaders in Uganda and Nigeria, they don't want to evolve. So what do we do?
Yeah, but it's, you know, the current leaders might say they don't want to evolve, but the society as a whole is evolving. I don't think that even in a country like the UK, the movement was led by political leaders. It was led by, it evolved from the society itself, from the people. It was never, there was never a case of a prime minister or anybody leading the LGBT rights. No, I can't think of one person. But it happened because society itself was evolving.
So your point is that solidarity is the key way of doing it, in other words. We have to make solidarity with the people who are interested in evolving, and that's acceptable, and that's not telling other countries what to do.
That's what I think.
Right, great. Well, thanks very much. There's a couple of questions here online. Blah, blah, blah. Well, there was one actually I saw before. Oh, yes. Can aid for LGBT rights muddle the conversation on gender equality? Are the two independent of one another, or can they work in tandem? Jessica, do you have a view about the interplay between them?
Aspects of LGBT issues obviously intersect with gender. There are also, if we're talking about gender equality in terms of women's rights, which is sometimes what it means, then of course there are women-identified LGBT people. So, I mean, as I said, from an African feminist perspective, we've always analysed it as understanding as a broader political attack on autonomy, bodily autonomy, and integrity, and choice and autonomy around the sexual and reproductive body. And so in that respect, that's actually why there's a lot of African feminist solidarity. If you look in a lot of African contexts, the civil society actors who are non-queer identified, who have come first to the table, are actually feminists, because they understand politically what's going on and see a solidarity there. So I think that is helpful. It really just depends on how it's done. I mean, again, similar
just
arguments.
Back to Elizabeth's point about entry points in a way, and
similar arguments are made. The whole, not in our culture, tradition thing. We're just sitting there snoring, thinking, "Wow, we've really been through this one." On abortion, on criminalizing marital rape. We've been there, So
can I ask too, how much do people think that this battle is actually about lesbians and gays? Because it often occurs to me that it's not about us at all. There's a poster that I was telling somebody about earlier on today. I don't know if you've seen it in Ukraine, and it's got a picture of the Moscow Day Parade, the military parade, and underneath it's got a picture of some gay parade, probably Berlin. And the subtitle is, "What parade do you want your son to be in?" It's actually a brilliant poster, but it's not really about gays. It's really about what's our orientation. Is it to Europe or is it to Russia? And again, it's the point you were making earlier on. Actually, they're making a political choice to use this as a football. We saw that here with Section 28. So I wonder, that's one of my questions, is are we right to focus, if you like, on lesbians and gays as lesbians and gays, or should we be thinking more broadly about the kind of right to live, if you like, and take it away from notions of sexuality and sex, if you like, and love and all those kind of sort of intimate personal notions, and actually look at it much more through the prism that you were suggesting, which was either the economic one or the political one? What do you think, Sunil? When you were fighting for that cause in Nepal, you know, how much were you fighting against prejudice, homophobia, and how much were you fighting actually something about the values of Nepal generally?
Yes, it's more about, I think, value, but also the root cause of overall discrimination. What we figured out quickly was that it's you know, the whole cultural mindset operates based on pride and shame, and it does not depend on your conduct, but it's depend on your gender role, and gender perception. Or gender expression, and because the masculinity is think good, and you know, and it starts from even before your fetus is born. So with ultrasound technology, they see now when a woman is pregnant, and if the fetus is male, she gets more care, because the sign of pride is growing up inside. And when childbirth, if a son, there's a party. If there is a daughter, a girl, then the family cries. So it's a you know, manifestation of that notion of pride and shame. And it's same thing happens as you grow up. During the puberty, for men it's a celebration, again with the bands and music and party. For women, they send you in a cave, and you're not supposed to see the daylight for 12 days, and a lot of women in far west of Nepal dies because they're not fed well, and they have to live for whole 12 days in a dark. And that's the, you know, when you turn into puberty, such a contrast of what is there, you know, a sense of pride and sense of shame. Same thing at the wedding as well, and the groom side all happy, they bride horse or cars and things, whereas the bride side, everyone cries, and you know, it's as if like they say, you okay, take our daughter, and with dowry we give you the burden to you, our shame to you, kind of. That's how the whole dowry thing has been started. And right. at death, you know, people say that if you do not have a son, who would who would lit your funeral pyre, and without son you can't go to heaven. So that kind of, you know, plays deep-rooted is there, and why women are discriminated exactly same way why you know, transgenders, gays, lesbians are discriminated, because we are considered less manly, even as a gay man.
Okay.
So the sexual orientation, I think, is less understood in our part of the world. It's more of gender roles and identity. And the existence is accepted, but not equal respect and rights are given to women and transgenders.
I guess my point generally too is to expand on that, is that actually the campaigns, it's back to this entry point and solidarity. It's about how you can mount campaigns, support people's campaigns that speak to the values of the country and the evolving values of the country, to use Elizabeth's point, rather than simply narrowing down on LGBT, because then people say, well, why are you worried about the queers, I suppose.
So
Elizabeth,
just one sentence. That's how, you know, we got good rapport and working relation with other marginalized population, and women. You know, the Dalit rights were similarly marginalized as well. People with disability were marginalized because they were seen again in a gender term. You know.
Right. Elizabeth, and then we'll have some questions. So get your questions or points or whatever ready, and there's a microphone. Elizabeth.
That poster makes me think, yes,
Hello?
we do need to be thinking far more critically about the way we're framing this debate, and I agree that it's not entirely about LGBT rights, and it's dangerous to frame it as such. For me, that poster really speaks to political assertions of statehood and the creation of the state through the kinds of debates that are mobilized by political leaders.
Absolutely.
And I would say then that this is still related to the rights that are conferred onto citizens. And if LGBT people are to be considered citizens, they do need to have their rights regulated and enforced through the law. In South Africa, for example, the hard-won democracy, the hard-won government that we currently have in power at the moment, does have and has enshrined really progressive rights in the Constitution, but even then, they're not enforced. And we have a president who had said quite publicly, if he has a gay man stand in front of him, he will punch him. So we need to be working, I think, in more subtle ways to think about how political leaders need to be held accountable to the ways that they're mobilizing public discourse around LGBT rights very strategically to create a particular notion of the state.
Yeah, I'd turn around and punch him back. Now, we've got questions or points. Hi, there's a microphone coming, and so if you could wait for the microphone, if you'd be kind enough to say who you are, where you come from, and if your country or whatever is relevant, then tell us that as well.
Sure. My name is Sam Gibson. I live in Bristol, but my accent is from Alaska. I'm a consultant who often works with different bilateral donors on the design of sort of social development and poverty programs. And I'd really value from the panel, and thank you very much for great presentations in a tight time frame, really value your thoughts on kind of principles around do no harm, around increased potential risk assessment against unintended consequences. I'm thinking in particular of some work I was doing supporting donors in Ghana. And our conclusion was that sophistication and some higher degree of care would be important in these contexts because of the backlash possibilities.
Thanks very much. There's a couple over there, and we'll take sort of three together. So there's a very, very active row there. BC at the end, and then this woman, the lady in black.
My name is Bisi Alimi. I'm currently a lecturer at Free University in Berlin on sexuality and gender identity.
You're late for class.
I'm on holiday. It's just a very short comment, and I just want us to readdress the narrative around responsibility. Over time, I think it's easier for us to shift the responsibility away from African countries. And we do that a lot when it comes to the issue of Uganda, where we blame the evangelicals for it, and then take away the fact that Africans can actually be responsible for their action. And it plays into this narrative of imperialism, that Africans cannot be homophobic. And for them to be homophobic, there must be an external factor that is much more superior than a black man to make a black man to be homophobic. And this take away the responsibility within the discourse of African homophobia for us to take responsibility. And it goes back to the conversation we're having about aid. And the question we're failing to answer is, what aid? Whose aid? And what really do we mean when we say we want to take aid away from a particular country because of a particular issue? And that's where I seriously agree with Elizabeth, that we've not defined what aid we are taking away. Is it military aid in the case of Uganda? Is it maternity aid or polio aid in the case of Nigeria? The narrative is so wide. Maybe if we're able to streamline it to one particular area, then we can now start a conversation around negotiating aid vis-a-vis human rights. Until we've done that, I think we're just making so much noise, and we really need to stop making noise.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fionnuala Murphy, International HIV/AIDS Alliance. Thank you to the speakers. It's been absolutely fantastic so far. I wanted to pick up quickly on the entry points, and I know this is a bit predictable, and I'm going to say this, but I think it's easy to sometimes say, well, the interventions that have happened through the HIV sector haven't worked, and actually those interventions have been really important. They have enabled organisations that do much more than HIV prevention, that do human rights, that do stigma reduction. They've enabled those organisations to get their first funding and get capacity building and develop their advocacy skills, and that funding has had implications which are much broader than HIV. But at the same time, let's not pretend that HIV is no longer an issue or isn't important. I was reading a piece by a Ugandan doctor the other day where he talked about how it was 2007 and men having sex with men in Uganda didn't know that they had a heightened risk of HIV infection. They actually thought that they were immune because they thought that HIV came from women. And I mean, that lack of information is a human rights violation in itself. So let's not forget that that issue remains important, and let's not throw out all the progress that has been made and the massive amount of progress that we still need to make on HIV prevention for those communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, three things there. One is about harm and unintended consequences. Do we need to take more care? The second, actually, which I thought we might start with, which was BC's point there about we can't we keep on shifting the responsibility from the Africans, and given that's where you're calling in from, Elizabeth, I wonder whether you'd like to respond to BC's point again, and in a sense it speaks to your point about the evolution of the countries, doesn't it? Do you think he's right in saying that we shouldn't shift responsibility from the African countries themselves by blaming it on some kind of deus ex machina?
Whether we shouldn't accept responsibility rather than blame it that somebody has brought it? Is that a question?
Yeah, I think BC's point was, are we in a sense being yet again kind of colonial by saying that Africans can't be homophobic on their own? They need help from American evangelicals to be really homophobic. And actually, do we really need to... His point was, speaking as a Nigerian, that we need to situate the responsibility in those African countries.
Well, I haven't found any of the societies that I know who traditionally were homophobic at all. As I said, their attitude was live and let be. We think this is a bit strange, but well, that's what you want, so let it be. And really, I'm not suggesting. All I'm saying is that as far as the legislation is concerned, that is where I'm saying that much of the work has been sponsored by American evangelicals. Sure. Okay. That is a fact. Okay. I'm not saying that people are not able to be homophobic by themselves, but the legislation that is being
this particular recent space.
Many of the countries around it definitely have got sponsors from the United States of America. Okay.
Views on that?
Sure, we are quite capable of being homophobic, like all other societies themselves. We are quite capable of doing it by ourselves. But I am saying that it is a bit difficult to have one part of the debate sponsoring one side here and then the other back punishing us or seeking to punish us because the other one is sponsoring something.
Okay. Views on the panel here on this point. Jessica?
No, I think it's a really important point, and I mean, I always point out the issue of the fundamentalist axis just because it's important to understand politically. I mean, people make political choices, that's what I said. They're sophisticated political actors making choices about who they want to ally with and who they're getting funding from. So, of course, people take responsibility. The Past and Sempers of the world and what have you, I mean, they take responsibility and they do it because they want to have a strategic alliance with, a group of Christian right in the States. There is a responsibility for solidarity. And I think it's also countries like South Africa, for example, who I know have been facing a lot of pressure to actually stand up in the African region and actually show more leadership. But also I think that progressive Africans have a little bit of a PR problem. Nobody wants to hear the voice. There's so much analysis and debate and leadership being taken by progressive Africans that's just not projected out into the world. In May of this year, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights put out a very strong statement condemning the persecution of people on the basis of presumed, it's a very progressive document.
Yeah. What was it said again? It was
called actual or presumed sexual orientation.
Just repeat
the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Okay, which is... Yeah, and that's different. That was a civil society initiative, but the actual African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is the human rights body that for the region, okay, a very progressive statement. And there's been tremendous leadership from the likes of Chisano, from, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Seun Kuti, all kinds of characters that have actually come and said, no, this is not what we want to do. So I think it's also that problem of, the bad side gets a lot of PR and then the progressive African voices don't get as much. And I think, we also have a responsibility amongst ourselves to also keep exploring, investigating, and reprojecting out the progressive African analysis. It's certainly there.
Elizabeth, just comment on I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Fanola's point about the point of entry on AIDS and HIV. I mean, were you being critical and saying that it was time to end that, or were you saying that we need to equip ourselves with more points of entry?
No, I wasn't at all being critical. I think it's been incredibly useful and invaluable, and not something we should throw away by any means. My background is in HIV, and so I'm particularly passionate about continuing to work in that field. And I think that there is a lot to be said too. For example, in Uganda, the number of people who've been going to access HIV services and antiretrovirals has declined since the passing of the anti-homosexuality bill because people are afraid to go to clinics. So we do need to continue working. What I'm proposing is that, and it's also not something new, I shouldn't say that I'm the first to suggest this at all, but I think what we do need to be thinking about are finding other avenues to be working with the kinds of logics that the leaders have and that leaders can take on board around economic development. And for that reason, I'm proposing that we think too about economic pathways.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. This point about extra protection, Kevin, maybe that's something you could comment on, is that, you know, what you're really saying is, do we have a greater duty of care because of the potential implications of the engagement and
Don't be clumsy.
yeah. I mean, do you have a view about how we might construct some ground rules, if you like, about this sort of extra protection that, you know, the not being clumsy rules?
Well, I mean, I think in practice it's really hard. That, you know, there are a lot of areas of aid policy where this do no harm principle in theory gets applied. But it's actually really tough to do it. You know, that every fragile state or conflict-affected country is supposed to have this, you know, you do an assessment of the potential implications of your intervention for a whole range of possible causes of conflict and tension between communities. But, you know, in reality, if you said, does this really have a major bearing on what donors actually do? I think the answer is no. You know, I mean, I would go back to Bisay's point, which I think is a really key one, that my own sense is, you know, if you look at the whole history of conditionality in the donor community, I'm being a bit sweeping here because I've only got a minute or two, but, you know, the broad story is this huge overestimation by donors of their ability to inform and influence complex domestic political processes. And I think the truth is that if you want traction engagement with those processes, you do it through solidarity. You know, you do it through supporting groups who are trying to make a difference on the ground. You do it by very publicly defending the values that those groups are expressing. You know, you use your influence across a wide range of formula to try and persuade and inform governments, to bring evidence to bear in public debates and to combat prejudice. And the thing is, you know, that in the long run, that's sort of less sexy than saying, okay, you know, we're not going to give you $50 million for some program or the other. But, you know, the truth is, it's likely to have much more impact in the longer term.
I've just found the report, so I'm just going to tweet the link so that people have got it. Let's take one more round of questions. We've got one. Oh my God. You've all woken up now. We aren't going to be able to get all of these. Note who's got their hands up and talk to the interview. There's a woman right on the far side there who had one, and then we'll kind of come to there, and then we'll do you in the middle if we can. Madam.
Madam, indeed. My name's Wendell. I think I wanted to kind of go back circularly to the whole let nations evolve on their own, picking up some points along the way. I'm just cognizant, really, that, you know, this is an excellent seminar, but there seems to be a severe shortage of grassroots activists in attendance, and that's an unfortunate matter because, you know, we're a lot of different organisations here talking about different types of solutions without necessarily having the relevant contributions from people right facing, you know, the issues. And I wanted to go back to the thing that Elizabeth was saying about letting nations evolve, in contradiction to what she talked about interference from US evangelical groups. So it's not just US. You know, we've got Paul Shiners in the UK that's been directly involved in promoting, you know, homophobia in Uganda. We know for a fact. And these are things that if we wanted to talk about intervention, we could certainly be addressing, you know, and that isn't about letting nations evolve because those groups are not letting them evolve. They're aware that they've lost a fight for, you know, supremacy in Western nations, and they're turning to manipulate in other nations. You know, if we talk about denying money, they will pump it in more. They're quite happy for people with HIV to die out because their sick, twisted minds will repeat the refrain about only the pure of God are left. And so, yes, we do need to intervene, and we need to take action about our own homegrown homophobia, transphobia that we are exporting to those nations. And I'm quite interested about what Elizabeth was saying about, you know, looking at the different ways in which we can look at how we deal with aid in the future. And what I want to know is, when are we going to start getting grassroots activists here in this country who are refugees and in other countries directly involved in helping them work? Because at the moment, those people are still facing, you know, terrible problems with support when they're fleeing for their lives.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, put some more hands up there, the ones that came in the front there, since you're by the microphone. You better be interesting, because there's loads of competition.
Pressure. Alison Marshall, International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF. Really want to agree that I see this as all about politics and states and creation of states. If we just look at what's been going on this year at the UN Commission on Status of Women, the Commission on Population and Development, where sexual rights have been absolutely conflated by some African governments in particular with sexual orientation and gender identity, and where we've seen direct discrimination against LGBT activists in the very corridors of the UN itself. So my question to the panel is, how do you see the LGBT agenda and these discussions in the context of the post-2015 development framework that is currently being negotiated, in particular the financing for development discussions which are currently underway?
Thank you very much. And then there was yes, the woman in the black dress. Yeah, no, you, that's right. When I know it's hard, but when I point at you, it turns out it's you.
Hi, I'm Florence Goddard from Student Stop AIDS campaign.
Can you hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
Sorry.
That's right.
Is that okay? So what I wanted to ask is, Student Stop AIDS and Stop AIDS at the moment, what we've been sort of doing to help the situation in Uganda is giving money to a few small groups, such as Sexual Minorities Uganda, who are filing a constitutional petition against the bill because of how it affects their LGBT people's constitutional rights. And do you think this is a good approach to use? And what have been the best sort of examples of NGO involvement in supporting the LGBT community that you've seen? And I also just wanted to say, on the African Commission resolution that you mentioned, what sort of significance do you think this will have against the bills that have already been passed?
What I'm going to do is, we'll remember the question about the way to do the aid, if you like, for the next session, if you like, because then that's specifically what we're focusing on, but we can remember the impact of the Commission. Firstly, we just take this point about how do we engage activists here, the diasporas, if you like. Is the plural of diasporas, or is it diasporum or something? So is there somebody from Oxford or Cambridge here? They'd probably know. But how do we engage the diasporas and activists here? I mean, I know that Kaleidoscope is making quite a degree of effort, and BC is a good example where you got involved with us early and did some work with the Nigerian diaspora, but we're trying hard to do that. But how, I mean, Sunil, what would be your view about how we best do it and how they best then relate to, you know, their own countries being here?
I think it's I don't know much about, because I'm new and very new to the sort of working with Western countries, activists and also donors, because I've all the time been in Nepal and working with the grassroots organization. What we felt there is so much to learn from South, and we always ask we asked the resource-rich countries and donors whether they could help us to get the grassroots activist from south to south, and which I think IMFAR this year helped to bring South African transgenders, Thailand transgenders. They brought to Nepal to learn Nepal's successful activism, which we thought that was fantastic.
But did you have any relationship south-north with any kind? Is there any kind of significant Nepalese diaspora? I may be making an assumption there.
There are maybe, but as a general diaspora, not as a Nepalese LGBT to LGBT who are here, and a lot of those people, I think, either in the closet or Gurkhas are here. I know very little to do with LGBT rights.
Quite clearly, that's an aspect of solidarity that we must keep in the front of our mind. Let's just ask the question there about the impact of the Commission on people and human rights, or human and people's rights. Yes, the human and people. Do you think it had an impact? Do you think that? I mean, you mentioned a number of very significant names, and particularly literary names. Do you think that there was an impact there, or do you think it has the same sort of effect that it does here, where people say it's effectively the African chattering classes? Why should we bother taking any notice?
It's not the African chattering classes.
I'm not
it's
saying
the
it is.
people
I'm
that
saying
set
they
the
might
precedence on human rights and the debate on human rights in the African region. So that's what I'm saying. If we're talking about formal politics, let's talk formal politics. In that context, it was the African Commission. So what they do is it's actually a commission of states and state parties. So what it means is that the state parties who are party to the African Charter, which is like the UN Charter on Human Rights, basically actually agreed to put out a statement.
Okay,
that's really big.
That's big.
And what it means is that you can call people to account on it. You know, as you know in law, how it goes, it's just all a series of little precedents here and there and a series of statements and frameworks or what have you that all add up to building a stronger case. So, for example, somebody mentioned the fact that SMUG, and it's also SMUG in Alliance, by the way, so it's actually a very broad coalition of Ugandan human rights activists who are taking on the constitutional case against the Act. It's good for their docket, right, that they're presenting to the court, saying that it's not only an issue of equality in the Ugandan constitution, also Africa regionally we have these, legal statements, etc. So again, it's just an important stating an African regional political position on something, and that's what I mean. That there is movement in different places.
Yeah. It's kind of like working with the Commonwealth, which Kaleidoscope's doing a lot with. In one sense, the Commonwealth is actually a kind of completely useless organisation, but it provides you with a whole set of platforms, which is absolutely crucial.
Again, just a point about the chattering classes, though, too. This is what I mean about the problem of the PR problem that we're having in terms of understanding the kinds of debates that happen in African contexts. For example, I've done quite a bit of work with African queer people who live in urban slums and very marginalized communities. I mean, their mums are out there defending them. Their cousins are doing. I mean, it's like there's tremendous community solidarity. And people who are challenging teachers who are being discriminatory, people who are going to police for things. But you know what I mean? It's like, so there's actually tremendous amount of community-based solidarity because this is people's children. It's their cousins, it's their partners, it's their whatever. So it's not like there's, some sort of elite belief in equality and then everybody else is sort of, succumbing to these backward beliefs. It's not that at all. So I think, again, we need to sort of understand what the dynamics are at hand and work out how to work with that and who the different actors are in different places. And so again, it's just a quick one about, is it a good strategy or not? It's a good strategy if people in the context who've done their situational analysis and political analysis think it's a good strategy. That's what makes a good strategy. They know what they're playing with, they know the political powers that are there, and they feel that that's the best strategy. That's always the best strategy to take. That's locally defined.
And certainly if you're interested in looking at further at those things, I mean, there's a couple of things. The work that Trinidad and Tobago we've done in Kaleidoscope and the work in Uganda has been about trying to map out a sort of grid, if you like. So what activists do, we've been supporting people to do, is to work out how you campaign on that long-term basis using all those different tools. Last question, very quickly, then it's tea and biscuit times because everybody will be having a hypoglycemic attack. But the question was about the post-2015 development settlement framework, and especially in relation to finance. And Kevin and Elizabeth, in that order, you might like to comment on, what we should be trying to do with that bit of movement policy.
I winced, as you said, post-2015 development.
I didn't say it, I'm just parroting.
No, we actually have somebody in ODI who's a world authority on this issue, and it's not me. I think the thing is that the more, to use the ghastly word, we can mainstream this issue in the broader development dialogue, whether it's on post-2015 or broader discussions, we should do it. There's always a danger with these post-2015 type discussions that it's become a sort of Christmas tree where you hang everything on it. Like, there are 300 rights that ought to be pursued, the elderly, the disabled, and everything else. And it does have a profoundly diluting effect. I mean, my sense on this is that, in some senses, the discussion that we're having here is about really how do you build the domestic alliances and provide international solidarity for the development of those alliances. That's the key starting point. I mean, personally, I would probably raise it in the post-2015 context without making too much of a hullabaloo on it.
Elizabeth, do you have a view further than that, or much the same?
Yeah, I also went slightly. There is a danger in thinking that the post-2015 development framework is going to be a panacea.
Can you talk into the microphone, because they're not able to hear otherwise?
Sorry. I really appreciate your question, and in fact, last year I was involved in quite a large consortium of different organizations working to advise Cameron and the high-level panel developing the post-2015 framework with about 40 organizations, grassroots organizations from around the world, saying these were the key priorities. Sexuality did emerge as one of the priorities, but from what I've seen in the drafts, there hasn't been much mention of it, no. So, yeah. So it is something we need to be keeping an eye on, and that's certainly something that's been coming up in the conversations I've been having with our donors.
Okay,
Beyond that,
well, thanks very much. Let's take a break now. Thank you to Elizabeth on the phone in Ghana. Can I just say to people online, do continue with your questions. We've got a second session, so keep them coming. It seems to me that the big thing that comes out of that is to articulate a different and broader case in order to make sure that what we're talking about is not simply seen as through the narrow prism, if you like, of one small group's activities and rights, but is seen actually as something that speaks to the societies and the evolution, to use Elizabeth's word, the evolution of the societies themselves, and that should be done in solidarity and not in any kind of imposing way. But thank you very much indeed to the panel, if you'd thank them and Elizabeth online, and you've got